Spiritual activism, receiving and responding to inspirations of divine energy. For this seventh and final essay of this series, I return to the revised definition of spiritual activism I offered in Essay 2. Spiritual activism, I'd like to define as intentionally reforming, or in effect challenging to the status quo, or business as usual, words and actions for the common good and or justice for vulnerable or oppressed populations, people, animals, nature, etc. Informed and inspired by a growing understanding and possibly a direct experience of the ultimate unity of all life, coupled with an intensifying inner love for others, life, and the spirit of life, the God of your understanding. And over time, a deep healing, liberation, or recovery from destructive habitual patterns, in part, and I'm going to repeat that because this is a very important, in part by regular, consistent, long-term spiritual practices. I have mentioned the mystery of divine grace in other essays of this series, so I invite you to reread those or revisit that because that is the essential, the other essential element, the mysterious element in deep change. So let's pick back up with the essay. Yes, there is a lot to work with in this definition. I get it. Therefore, I invite you to read it and reread it, perhaps aloud, slowly, very slowly. And with that working definition refresh, let's also return to Dante's Divine Comedy. You may recall that Dante began his journey lost in the woods until Virgil arrived and offered him guidance to the Mount of Joy that was visible in the distance, but blocked by the three beasts. And refer back to Essay 5 for that scenario and what those beasts stand for. So with Virgil's guidance, as well as much inner work along the way, Dante makes his way from the dark woods to a bright green, light-filled forest. And this is the final level of purgatory, the garden of earthly paradise. And this is where Virgil crowns Dante the Lord of himself. In effect, he has reached a degree of self-awareness and self-mastery from his efforts and grace in the journey throughout. As Vernon highlights, Dante's motivation is now pure, his will correctly oriented, and his heart is free to love fully and genuinely. Virgil then bids Dante farewell and departs, as reason has taken Dante as far as it can, and that's to the border of paradise. So in effect, he's taken him to the border of transformational union, the phase of the transforming union phase of the spiritual journey. And now Patrice, the symbol of love, enters the story and becomes his primary guide into paradise. Please note that I am barely scratching the surface of this timeless classical masterpiece. I encourage you to explore it directly, along with the assistance of Mark Vernon's Dante's Divine Comedy, A Guide for the Spiritual Journey, and or Dante's Road, The Journey Home for the Modern Soul by Mark Thomas Shaw. As beautifully illustrated in Dante's Divine Comedy, the transformative union phase of the threefold way necessitates a letting go of rational understanding, a laying down or a dropping of preconceived notions, and an opening of mind to more unitive ways of knowing, while also surrendering to the flow of divine intelligence and energy. From my limited understanding of Taoism, we could also refer to this as Wu Wei, or entering a state of active receptivity. In this state of active receptivity, we open ourselves to the flow of life energy or life force, aka the Holy Spirit, Ruah, Shakti, Chi, etc. Terms that are used throughout the wisdom traditions to speak to that spiritual flow of energy, and to the fresh inspirations or movements of the soul that may arise as we surrender our personal agendas. It is important to note that this is a practice of a lifetime, as I have reiterated throughout these 7 essays, that requires discernment and humility and self-honesty and openness to feedback themes. Note, if multiple people provide similar feedback, there may be something to examine. For example, if someone tells you repeatedly, or multiple people tell you that they have a challenging time working with you, then there may be something there to examine. It is also helpful to observe the impact that actions have on others. Are they unifying or divisive? Are they helpful or hurtful? Constructive or destructive? So again, this is ongoing inquiry and self-honesty and examination. Compassionate self-examination. However, most, if not all, of the systems of self-transformation I have studied and worked with over the years emphasize the need for detachment from specific outcomes or results. So this is very different than how many of us are trained in Western management or goal orientation. This calls for a detachment from specific results. In other words, assuming good intentions, right effort, a regular spiritual practice, similar to what I've touched upon throughout this series, and an authentic discernment process. We follow the inspirations and we, quote, let go and let God. It is critical to reemphasize the necessity for regular self-observation and examination of conscience, in addition to engaging in reality checks with a trusted friend, a coach, a spiritual director, a preacher, etc., a counselor. We humans have blind spots, shortcomings, and biases. Period. We are all a work in progress. We are all going to fail and fall repeatedly, and repeatedly. However, that is it. That is the path of healing, maturation, and transformation. We get up, we dust ourselves off, and we return to the path. I'm going to conclude this series on the topic of spiritual activism with this final essay, even though I admit there's much I have not covered adequately. Therefore, if you have not yet chosen a holistic and comprehensive system of self-transformation, and for those of you that are rooted in or maybe have left your religious or spiritual tradition, I invite you to go back, return to that with an open mind and open heart to the inner tradition of that religion. So, for example, in Christianity, that's contemplative Christianity, with writers such as Father Thomas Keating, Richard Rohr, Cynthia Bourgeois, and as I've mentioned in earlier essays, all of our world traditions have an inner tradition supporting self-transformation. Unfortunately, most of us don't necessarily grow up knowing that, but it is there. If you're not ready to do that, or even if you are, you can complement that by one of the holistic or integral, more secular, if you will, psycho-spiritual frameworks that I've offered in these essays. For example, integral life practice, rooted in the work of Ken Wilber. So please don't end your inquiry here with these essay series. Because as highlighted by Brant Courtright in his book, Psychotherapy and Spirit, quote, people generally think of the spiritual path as safe, if not easy, then at least a little, protective haven from the existential insecurities of life. And boy, we know those, we're feeling that, right? However, he says, like any great endeavor, and this is so important, like any great endeavor, the spiritual journey also has risk and dangers. So we need to understand that. And returning to the inner tradition of your religious heritage, and or returning to a holistic, more secular, or not specifically related to a particular wisdom tradition, a framework that I've offered, will help point those out and help keep you on a positive and constructive path. We live in turbulent times. I don't think I need to talk too much about that. And at the same time, we live in amazing times because we have the world's wisdom traditions at our fingertips. Never before has this been the case. Humanity having access to the world's wisdom traditions, with a click of a mouse. However, simply reading these essays or a book or two on spirituality will have very little impact. The impact, the value, comes from adopting a way of life that nurtures healing, maturation, wholeness, and transformation over the course of a lifetime, my friend, over a course of a lifetime. Happy travels, fellow sojourner and spiritual activist.